Transportation services will be provided this evening by Zoom and phone line. I will walk us through a few instructions on how to use this service, and then I will have our interpreter, Laura, provide guidance in Spanish. To change your language settings, please select the interpretation button. This button has a global icon on it and is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can click on the global icon to change the language that you would like to hear. And for this meeting this evening, you will have Spanish and English as your options. To only hear the interpreted language, click Mute Original Audio. And with that said, I'm happy to hand it over to Laura to share these instructions in Spanish. Laura?
Buenas noches, bienvenidos a la reunión de CalGEM para el Departamento de Conservación. Para esta reunión tenemos disponibles interpretación en español. Para accesar el servicio, por favor, busquen el icono en figura de globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Opriman ese icono y luego seleccionen el idioma que desean escuchar. Una vez que estén en ese idioma, necesitan oprimir el botón que dice Mute Original Audio, silenciar el audio original. También van a poder escuchar esto por teléfono si así lo desean y las instrucciones están disponibles así mismo. Gracias.
Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, next slide, please. We will now review the agenda to get a sense of what information we will be providing you with this evening. We have gone through our welcome and interpretation services. And for the first of our presentations, we have the California Air Resources Board and California Geologic Energy Management Division, also known as CalGEM, providing an update on research regarding the fugitive emissions from oil and gas wells. Following this, CalGEM will provide an update on the release of proposed well sites for Phase 2 state abandonment. And lastly, a presentation on the leak detection request for information will be provided, also by CalGEM. Before we transition into the public comment segment of this evening, I will share how you can contact the Methane Task Force team after this meeting and at any time in the future. We will then transition into our final agenda item, which is the public comment period. I will provide a few instructions on how we will conduct the public comment session to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. And please note now that the public comment session is for the purpose of allowing folks to share their thoughts and questions. However, we will not be addressing or responding to questions at this time. You will be provided a few resources for directing your questions, such as the FAQ and the Methane Task Force contact information. Please note that now, and of course, I'll remind you later once we approach the public comment period. With that said, we will conclude tonight's meeting around 6:30 p.m. Next slide, please. Thank you again for being here with us, and I will now turn it over to our first presentation.
Thank you, Jamie, and good evening. I am Lila Velasco. I'm a senior engineer with CalGEM of the Department of Conservation. I'm going to be talking about some efforts underway to measure fugitive emissions coming from oil and gas wells in the state. I will give an update on CalGEM's upcoming work, and then Jim Nayarati from the Air Resources Board will share some information on CARB study. Next slide, please. There has been a lot of science in understanding emissions from oil and gas wells in the past, but there continues to be an opportunity for more to be done. Both CalGEM and CARB are conducting studies to better understand air emissions associated with oil and gas wells in California. Next slide, please. It's worth noting that one of the key differences between these studies is that the CARB study focuses only on plugged and abandoned wells, while the CalGEM study will include idle, deserted, and plugged and abandoned wells. I'll elaborate more on what these well statuses mean on the next slide. I want to briefly describe the well categories we're referring to with these studies. However, to be clear, these are only a few of the possible well statuses that a well can be grouped into. An idle well refers to any well that has been inactive for a period of 24 consecutive months. An idle deserted well means any idle oil and gas well that no longer has an operator responsible for its plugging and abandonment. And lastly, a plugged and abandoned well refers to a well that has been permanently sealed with a cement plug, preventing hydrocarbon leakage to the surface. Next slide, please. In last October's Methane Task Force meeting, we shared that CalGEM would be conducting a study of fugitive emissions of selected oil and gas wells throughout the state, with the intent of using the data collected to estimate the overall emissions of idle, deserted, and abandoned wells in California. At that fall meeting, we announced that we had released a request for applications. Since then, we reviewed the applications we received and are excited to announce that we'll be working with Cal Poly. The contracting process has been completed and work is underway. Next slide, please. The next steps will be to work through the study elements. The first task is to develop a study plan. Cal Poly will work with the division and stakeholders in determining key study design elements to finalize the plan. The next step will be to conduct emissions measurements on the selected wells. And lastly, those results will be compiled into a summary for inclusion in a draft and final report. Next slide, please. The deadlines for those steps that we just discussed are shown here. By January 1st, 2026, CalGEM will post all results of the emissions testing on our website. By July 1st, 2026, the team will have completed a final draft report. The draft report will be provided for peer review and comment to the operators whose wells were tested and other experts and non-governmental organizations. And by January 1st, 2028, the final report will be posted to CalGEM's website. I'll now hand it over to Jim Nairati to give an update on the CARB study.
All right, thanks, Lila. As Lila said, my name is Jim Nairati. I'm the manager of the oil and gas section here at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. And I'm going to give a little presentation on a study that's just been recently concluded that we did from measuring emissions from plugged and abandoned oil and gas wells. Next slide, please. So the goal of this study was to estimate emissions coming from plugged and abandoned wells in California. Right now, they're not accounted for in the inventory, so they're essentially, it's like they're being having zero emissions. We contracted also with Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo, just like CalGEM is doing. And Cal Poly researchers went out last year and measured emissions from 60 oil and gas wells, plugged and abandoned oil and gas wells in the southern San Joaquin Valley. This list of 60 wells came from a much larger list of over 1,000 wells from CalGEM, but they were prioritized looking at some selection criteria as well as our available funding could only do a limited amount. Next slide, please. So the selection criteria included things such as how long the well was in operation, when was the well plugged, the total oil and gas production that came out of that well, the depth of the well, and so on. What we wanted to do was get a variety of well types and not just focus on, one size or one depth or one length of operation. So we use those to help divvy up the 60 wells. One of the other criteria was a size of the operator. So this study actually includes 3 large operators for some of the wells and 1 small operator. But I will note that that 1 small operator actually represents 6 previous small operators who had ceased operations. So that 1 remaining small operator was the responsible party for all those previously plugged and abandoned wells by those 6 operators. Now, one of the pieces of information that comes from CalGEM was the coordinates of the well. Now, remember that these are plugged and abandoned wells. So there's, the holes dug around the well casing is cut off 5 or 10 feet below grade. The remaining of the casing is filled with concrete, and then all the dirt and soil is put back over where the well casing was. And so from the surface, you can't tell where the well is exactly. So using the coordinates that came from CalGEM, the researchers went out with what's called a magnetometer, which is essentially a very sensitive, high-powered metal detector. And starting from the coordinates we had, they used the device to see if that was a spot-on location, or if they had to move around the original location a little bit until they found the exact location of the casing below ground, and then they would mark that location of the well. So next slide, please. And then so the researchers would, now that it's been located and staked, they would then come out with what's called a large scale static flux chamber. And that's the little stainless steel box you see in the foreground. I kind of use this image to give you a sense of scale. It's 1 meter by 1 meter with about a ½ meter high. And you see there, it's over what is a plugged and abandoned well, right, very adjacent to a currently producing well. And what the researchers would do, the idea was that it's sealed at the bottom and sealed at the top. And so now you essentially trap this volume of air in that box. And what they're going to do is, over the span of a couple hours, they are going to attach evacuated stainless steel canisters to the top of this chamber and pull samples at 0 minutes, 7 minutes, 15 minutes, and so on up until 2 hours. And so that way you have a gradient of what happens to the various emissions over time. And the interesting thing was that, as you may expect, that we measured emissions coming from the ground over that time in some of the wells for some of the compounds, but also measured what I'll call negative emissions, or emissions going into the ground over time. So the soil is essentially taking up some of those compounds over time, as well as possibly the methane inside oxidizing. So in those samples they collected, those were then sent to a lab, actually at UC Irvine. And as you see on the left hand of that screen, they were analyzed for methane, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and 96 non-methane volatile organic compounds, or as we'll say in the rest of these slides, NMVOCs. So that's a lot of organic compounds that the lab is analyzing for. And as I mentioned, in some cases, those went into the soil, and in some cases, some of them came out of the soil, and it varied among the 60 wells. So let's go to the next slide, please. And before I moved on to some of the results, I did want to identify where these wells were. And obviously, we had to pull way back to get both the west side and the Bakersfield area in this image. But there were 6 oil fields that were studied. And starting from the upper left, they're color coded as well. But you see Lost Hills in the purple circle, South Bell Ridge in the light blue circle, Midway Sunset in the reddish orange circle. And those are all on the left, and those are major operators or large operators. And then that single operator who represented 6 small operators over time are on the right, and that's Kern Bluff in the gold circle, Fruitvale in green, and Mountain View in black. And obviously Mountain View and Fruitvale are just a handful of wells, but you'll see that the number in parentheses is the number of wells from each oil field. So those add up to the 60, And the Kern Bluff one is on the same order of magnitude as at least South Bell Ridge and Lost Hills, and then you see Midway Sunset has quite a bit. So moving on from that, I think we'll go to the next slide and start talking a little bit about the results. So these are results, and these come from the wells, or the plugged and abandoned wells that are underground, as we talked about, and they're in emissions in grams per year. So this, relatively small units here we're talking about. The first line is methane from all the measurements of all 60 wells, and you see there's a low. It's actually negative, which means it was getting absorbed into soil, -6 grams per year. The high was 4,000 grams per year, or 4 kilograms per year, with the average being about 70 grams per year. Now that 4,000 is represented by two very large readings in 2 of the 60 wells. So if we were to take those out, you have, which is the next line, methane with the 2 high measurements removed. You see, obviously, the low stayed the same at -6 grams, and then the high drops orders of magnitude to 0.8. And then curiously, the average is a negative number, obviously, because of the shrinking of that high value, which is interesting because that almost implies that there's a sink for the methane in these kind of soil above the wells. And then also total NMVOCs, non-methane VOCs, volatile organic compounds. That's all 96 combined. We had a low of another negative number, a high of 8 grams, and an average of a positive but pretty small number. And then I was interested and pulled out benzene from that total of non-methane VOCs, and you see again a small negative number for the low, small positive number for the high, and a very small positive number for the average. And I guess to put this in some kind of context, it's like, well, what is 4 kilograms per year? I don't know if that's big or small, but to give you an idea, a single valve on some piece of oil and gas equipment leaking at 1,000 ppm, which is our California's regs, a limit for a leak, equates to roughly 300 kilograms per year. So you're talking about something that's 100 times bigger than the biggest one here from one leaking valve, and this is the entire well under the ground. So I kind of just wanted to give you some context. Excuse me, next slide, please. So there's some more results. These first 2 bullets are kind of big picture results from this research that make it unique. And one, of course, is that there was documentation of these negative, as I'm calling them, emissions, as well as the positive emissions coming out of the ground. And it's also the one of the first, if not the first, study that actually is measuring these non-methane VOCs, typically from plugged and abandoned wells. Typically, those previous studies are really focusing on methane. Methane's as you saw, the largest emission compound, but it's usually the easiest one to study. But the accuracy and the accuracy and the power of that flux chamber really helps to get to those values. So then, as you remember at the very beginning, the idea was like, well, what's the statewide emissions from plugged and abandoned wells? And so using those numbers in the previous slide, we see that using those high methane ones, the 4,000 gram ones, from all the measurements, it would come out to roughly 13 metric tons per year. And this is from all plugged and abandoned wells in the state. And then if we were to remove those 2 high measurements, again, the methane kind of goes to a negative number, a slight negative number, which would indicate a sink. But there's no reason to not count those high ones. We don't know that they're necessarily outliers. With many things, oil and gas, there are frequently a small percentage that have the bulk of the emissions. So, it would make sense to count those. And then the non-methane VOCs, again, statewide from all plugged and abandoned wells, came out to a relatively small number of 0.07 metric tons per year. And again, to give you some context, the methane emissions from all fugitive methane from oil and gas operations in the state, so that's oil and gas production, processing, and storage, comes out to roughly 50,000 metric tons per year. So we're talking 13 is a fraction of a percent, a hundredth of a percent. So I just want to give you some context about that. And it does, this would indicate that, assuming a 0 or near 0 in our inventory has been accurate so far. But it'll be important to wait for the study that CalGEM's doing, as well as any other data to finally update our inventory. But so now I think I would go to the next slide, please, which is my last slide. So we've obviously gotten this final report, and I just pulled out some of this information from it. It's a 100+ page report with lots more details, lots more statistics in there. We're going through it one last time with Cal Poly to make sure that we, dot all our I's and cross all our T's. So we plan to post it on our website that you see there. That's going to be posted later in the chat with this later this summer. And then also the researchers from Cal Poly plan to submit a paper to a peer-reviewed journal later this year. So that'll be another avenue for looking into this research. Oh, and then Ava just posted that link right there now. Okay, so that's it for me. And I will now turn this back over to Jamie.
Great. Thank you so much, Lila and Jim, for those very thorough updates and helpful context. And thank you to those who are engaging in the Zoom chat with your questions and comments. We acknowledge and appreciate your participation. And now it's my pleasure to invite Robert to share an update on the phase 2 of the State Well Abandonment Program. And please transition to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, and good evening, everybody. I'm Robert Schaaf. I'm the State Abandonment Program Manager for CalGEM. And today I'd like to talk to you about our program, and I'll give a little background of it, and then go into the phase 2 wells that we're now proposing to abandon as part of the program. The complete list of phase 2 wells is posted on our website, the CalGEM website, and you can find that on the Methane Task Force page as well as the State Abandonment page. For those that are new to us, I'd like to just give a brief background of the State Oil and Gas Well Abandonment Program. There are approximately 5,300 likely orphaned oil and gas wells across the state of California. These are wells that there is not a financially viable operator that can abandon these wells, and it's left to the state to undertake the abandonment of the wells. We've known about this problem for a while, but until recently, we didn't have funds available to address it. Fortunately, we now have state funds to address it, as well as federal funds that are coming from the Department of Interior that are focused on abandoning orphaned oil and gas wells. In phase 1, we focused on the highest risk wells, and we've started to abandon these wells, and that's the ongoing phase of work right now. And what I'd like to talk to you now about is upcoming work in phase 2. Next slide, please. So for phase 2, we went through our prioritization process that was described in a prior Methane Task Force meeting, where we've ranked the wells from highest risk to lowest risk. And they are in tiers from 1 being the highest risk wells to 5, which would be the lowest risk wells. In phase 1, again, we focused on the highest risk wells, and those are the ones that were near people and communities that pose a risk to them, a lot of times because these wells were actually leaking or in high pressure. So for phase 2, we are taking the remaining high-risk wells and on the list, as well as any wells that we find near these high-risk wells. So these tier 1 and tier 2 wells are the high-risk wells. We have located and identified them and put them in the program. And then for efficiency's sake, we've also added any wells that are in a particular area there. Now, you can see from the map that's being shown right now, and the stars that are on it and the dots, we have wells throughout the state of California, from very southern parts and to very northern parts of California. Next slide, please. Overall, in phase 2, we have 217 wells that are included in the program throughout the state, and 121 or 56% of these wells are located in disadvantaged communities. So this exceeds our objective of getting 40% by quite a bit. Next slide, please. Focusing on the different areas that we have in phase 2, we'll first look at the Southern District operation. The Southern District consists of most of Los Angeles County, plus Orange County, San Diego County, and the counties in the southern state, including San Bernardino and Riverside County. In the Southern District, our well count includes, I think this is not correct on this slide, but it includes approximately 15 wells, of which 2 are in disadvantaged communities, and it covers 5 different counties throughout the Southern District. Next slide, please. In Central District, where we have most of the wells in the state, this is the areas in Bakersfield, Kern County area, as well as the surrounding counties to Kern County. And so there's 146 wells in the Central District, and they cover 4 different counties. And of those 146 wells, 104 in disadvantaged communities. And so we do have quite a number of wells in our Central District, but that's to be expected since this is where most of the wells in the state are located. Next slide, please. Our Northern District covers all the rest of the counties in the state, starting with the northern part of Los Angeles County, and includes Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, and all the counties north of that, outside of the ones that we mentioned in the Central District, which were the ones around Kern County. So it's quite a large geographic area. And in the Northern District, in phase 2 program, we have 56 wells, of which 15 are in disadvantaged communities. And they covered 8 different counties within the state. And as you can see, they're spread quite wide, all the way from Ventura County to all the way to the very northern part of California. Next slide, please. So moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, the draft expenditure plan, which includes the phase 2 wells, is now posted on the CalGEM website. It can be reviewed, and it has the details of all the wells that are included, all 217 wells that are included in the phase 2 program. We're going to begin our 30-day public comment period. And at the same time, we're doing local government outreach. So we're talking to the government officials and agencies that are in the areas where we're going to do the abandonment work, to inform them of our work and to address any concerns that they might have. From the public comments and the local government outreach, then we plan to then finalize the phase 2 expenditure plan, which we will then present at the 4th quarter methane task force meeting. And then after that finalized plan, we plan to move forward with these phase 2 program. And with that, it'll be back to Jamie.
Thank you, Robert, for that very detailed presentation. I want to invite all attendees to access the links that are being provided in the chat, as you may find them to be helpful in regard to your questions and comments. Next slide, please. I am now going to invite Layla to provide a little bit of information and an update on the leak detection request for information.
Thank you, Jamie. I have a brief update to share on CalGEM's leak detection request for information. No, perfect. At the Methane Task Force meeting in February, CalGEM announced an effort to gather information on technology for leak detection from oil and gas operations. The public comment period closed on May 31st, and we received several submissions from oil and gas operators, technical experts, and environmental groups. Next slide, please. We will still accept comments and welcome continued discussion on the topic. The document with discussion questions is available on the CalGEM webpage at the link shown here, and that was just dropped into the chat. And within that document, there's an email address to direct submissions and any questions to. The comments that have been received so far are being reviewed and considered to establish leak prevention requirements for operators. Thank you. And with that, I will hand it back over to Jamie.
Great, thank you for that update. Next slide, please. All right, before we transition to public comment, I want to share how you can contact the Methane Task Force team with any questions and/or comments, and how you can stay informed. As you see here on this slide, if you have questions or comments following tonight's meeting, you can email the Methane Task Force team at methanetaskforce@conservation.ca.gov. Similarly, if you'd like to receive updates regarding the Methane Task Force, you can contact that same email address in order to request to subscribe to the Methane Task Force listserv. Next slide, please. We have now reached the public comment segment for this evening. Again, please note that we will not be answering your questions at this time. However, we encourage you to visit the Methane Task Force FAQ page and/or email the email address that was previously listed. The public comment period is solely to provide you with an opportunity to express your thoughts, but again, we won't be answering questions at this time. And with that said, I want to let you know that I will be toggling back and forth between attendees who raise their virtual hands to speak, as well as the phone line. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak, and I will go in order of the questions and/or comments received. With that said, we welcome you to share when you are comfortable to do so. And I see that Laura has her hand raised first. Laura, please share when you're ready.
Yes, this is Laura Rosenberger Hyder, and I heard that the continuous air monitors installed by industry are offline over 25% of the time, and they're missing a lot of leaks or pollution events. Earthworks thermographics claim that there were 22 pollution events in 2023 that operators on site with their on-site monitors did not record.
Thank you, Laura. You still have some time left if there's anything else that you would like to share with us. Okay, thank you.
Are there additional groups monitoring those for leakage, those wells for leakage?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you chiming in. Next in line, who has their virtual hand raised, I'm going to hand it over to Cesar. When you're ready, please share.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Cesar. I am from the Kern County area, and I'm happy to see that CARB is here. I want to point out that there are some exemptions in section 95569.g of the California Oil and Gas Rule. And under section E and G of the California Oil and Gas Rule, it points out several components that are exempt and also allows operators to do an annual self-test that they self-report in order to be exempt. There are 2 wells currently next to Truxton Park that enjoy this exemption and are openly venting gas into a park, into a public space. I think there should be extra monitoring, and if there is exemptions in valves and components, then that should fall under the jurisdiction of the California Methane Task Force. Otherwise, there is a great amount of emissions that are not being reported, collected, or taken account for because of these exemptions. And that to me is a failure of oversight and enforcement. So I would like for those things that are exempt in that section of the California Oil and Gas Rule to be overseen. Section D also gives the Air Resources Board authority to go on site whenever they need to do these types of inspections. So if CalGEM or any other part of the methane task force does not have the authority to do so, California Oil and Gas Rule 95569.D gives ARB the authority to go on site and do inspections whenever needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very thorough thoughts and expectations. I appreciate you sharing those. I see that Marcia has her hand up next. Marcia, when you're ready, please, you are welcome to share.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. My name's Marcia Hanscom. I'm with Defend Ballena Wetlands and the Coastal Lands Action Network on the Los Angeles coast, unceded lands of the Tongva, Gabrielino, Shoshone people. And I'm really happy to have found this meeting today. It just happened to have another coalition I'm involved with mention it at a meeting and didn't know that this whole operation is happening. And along those lines, I feel like I have a lot to read on your websites. Thank you for giving all that information. But I also would like to suggest that you share this with other environmental agencies, because hundreds of us have been testifying about the Playa del Rey oil field at meetings like the Coastal Commission, the Coastal Conservancy, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we have never been directed to this task force. Yet one of the issues was an improperly abandoned oil well that when a hotel decided to build a new parking structure, found the gas well, and a big blowout happened in Marina del Rey. And so a lot of folks here would really like to communicate, I'm sure, and I'll be happy to pass information along as I can. I also am very interested in how this task force is relating its work to the Playa del Rey gas storage facility that is in and around the only state ecological reserve in LA County, the Ballena Wetlands Ecological Reserve. And there, unfortunately, is an effort to expand and put new gas infrastructure there when we are supposed to be phasing out methane. And I hope that we will be.
That is the about 2-minute mark. Thank you, Marcia, for sharing. I really appreciate it. I encourage you to drop your contact information into the chat so I can access that later. Thank you for your suggestions, your thoughts, and your comments. And now, before I pivot over to the other hands that are raised here in this virtual space, I also want to acknowledge and check in to see if there are any callers on our phone line who would also like to share. Aldo, is anyone over there who would like to share?
Jamie, there's no questions in the phone line.
Great, thank you so much. I will circle back to you in a little bit. The next person in line who has their hand raised is Elizabeth.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Fisher. I'm a senior attorney with Earth Justice. CalGEM's scientific advisory panel found that a complete phase out is the only way to truly protect all Californians from the dangerous effects of oil and gas production, including methane, with setbacks and engineering controls together as the next best option. As you know, SB 1137 is now law, requiring both a 3,200-foot setback between communities and oil wells and compliance with health protection measures, including leak detection and response plans. We appreciate CalGEM's promptness in returning relevant permit applications to operators to demonstrate their compliance. And we call on the agency to release information regarding the applications affected so far and to keep the public informed of SB 1137 related permit actions. We also call for swift promulgation of a permanent rule that improves upon the existing SB 1137 emergency implementation regulations and prioritizes leak prevention. Any regulations under development should not factor in cost effectiveness at the expense of human health, but must make polluters pay to address a problem that they created. This includes requiring best available leak prevention and detection technology at all oil wells, including idle wells, wellhead only sites, and heavy oil sites, both inside and outside the setback area. Fugitive emissions from all these wells represent a major source of greenhouse gases from methane and ozone-causing volatile organic compounds and present a major public health threat. Thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your input and your thoughts. I now see that Robert has his hand raised as well. And Robert, I would like to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. My name is Roy, full name Robert Yun van de Hoek. I'm an environmental scientist, wildlife biologist, hydrologist background, interdisciplinary degrees in geography and environmental biology. And I am from Los Angeles, and my comments are directly about Los Angeles County and the Playa del Rey oil field, partly on LA County unincorporated lands and partly on City of LA annexed lands, and speaking from unceded Native American lands of the Tongva and Gabrielino peoples. I am concerned about several things. One is the difference between injection and extraction gas wells and the differences in how they need to be plugged and whether they even need to be plugged. The reason is that the gas doesn't stay confined to the wells or the abandoned wells or idle wells. The gas is also traveling through shale rocks that are highly fractured and broken and geologically, so that a lot of methane gas reaches the surface a mile or more away from 1 to 2 miles away from where gas wells are abandoned. So there needs to be a wider type of monitoring throughout the area, not just what gases are escaping at the abandoned well sites. And at the Ballona wetlands, we have an endangered species, a federally endangered species and a state endangered species. Both of them are songbirds.
Roy, I'm going to have to ask you to pause there for the time being as we've reached the 2-minute mark. I want to first give other folks an opportunity to share, and if no one else raises their hand or after people have completed their share, I'm happy to circle back to you so you can continue your thoughts and your comments. Thank you so much for understanding.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
And I would like to also at this time check in on the phone line to see if anyone has joined us or if anyone has been waiting to share their thoughts. Aldo, is there anyone on the phone line?
Have a question, you may press *1 on your telephone.
No questions at the moment on the phone line.
Thank you so much. For the time being, I don't see that anyone else has their virtual hand raised. So Roy, if you would like to, you're welcome to continue your thoughts and comments. We will restart the 2-minute clock. if and when you're ready.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm ready. Robert Jan van de Hoek again, continuing with where I left off on the first 2 minutes, and that would be about the endangered species. And one is the Belding savanna sparrow, state endangered, and the other is Leisbell's vireo, federally endangered. And both of them are songbirds, and they're small birds, and they have small respiratory systems and physiology that's more delicate. And they also have high songs that are very difficult, high frequency songs. So noise impacts can happen during well plugging in the nesting season. But mostly I wanted to encourage for some biological studies on animal species and their impacts of gas, methane gas, because this is officially an oil field, but it's been used for methane gas storage, which is coming from different states. And there's a lot of concerns because it's on also a state of California ecological reserve that's celebrating its 20th anniversary. And if the gas is not being injected anymore, then that means over time there would be less gas would be moving buoyantly back into the atmosphere. So I'd like to talk about the concept of letting sleeping dogs lie metaphor, where sometimes not doing anything and just having time to let the gas dissipate as it's going to anyways. And in terms of that would save a lot of money, finances, and it would probably work well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you got the opportunity. Glad you had the opportunity to finish your thoughts. Thank you for being here this evening. I want to give a few moments of space and time for anyone if they wish to collect their thoughts before sharing once again. You're welcome to raise your hand. I will check in on the phone line once more. So I'll just pause here in case anyone else would like to share their thoughts, comments, and/or questions. Marcia, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
There, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Okay, Marcia Hanscom again from Defend Biona Wetlands and Coastal Lands Action Network. So what else I wanted to say is that this Playa del Rey gas storage facility was called out in the CCST study that I do see you have on your website. And it was called out to say that it's the most dangerous in the state because it's so close to where so many people live, where there are schools, where there are places of worship. And you know, when the gas storage facility was first put in there, none of that was there. It was in the 1940s. It was an experiment to see if they could store methane gas in this old oil field. The experiment's really well past its prime, especially now that we know that methane gas is such a big contributor to climate change. And because of all of those things, the city of Los Angeles has voted to ask the governor to consider closing this storage facility, or at least stopping injecting gas here, stopping the pipelines from coming from Oklahoma and Texas to here. And only less than 1% of the gas used in California is in this storage facility. So it just seems like it's time. The city of Santa Monica has joined in, the city of Culver City has joined in, and the LA County Board of Supervisors. They have all weighed in saying we should stop injecting gas here, because if there were an explosion like there was at Aliso Canyon, we would have LAX airport closed down for months. So there's a big concern about it. It's the oldest gas storage facility. It's really got, you know, like I said, past its prime. If there's any way that this particular effort can include that, it would be great.
Thank you, Marcia. I hear you, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. I see that Roy, your hand is raised again. Roy, you're welcome to share when you're ready.
Thank you again, Jamie. I'm doing so because you were welcoming, and appreciate more time here. In the initial comment of Ms. Marcia Hanscom, where she mentioned a blowout that happened in the last 10 years for the new hotel that was put in Marina del Rey, unincorporated LA County, along Via Marina, close to Marquesas and Tahiti Way intersections. There was a gentleman, there was flames for quite a bit of time, and a lot of liquid and gray colored substances that went into the atmosphere, maybe as high as a quarter mile up into the, and it was, they were attempting to cap the abandoned well that they didn't know about, that was discovered during the hotel instruction. But there was a gentleman that was about 100 feet up on the drilling platform, and he was completely smothered in this gray substance and the liquid, and I'm sure the respiratory system of the gentleman, the skin, and etc. I really never got to find out what happened to that individual. And I'd like to know, and I think the public would like to know, and just the human element, you know, of that person. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much for that input. Really appreciate it. I would like to, lower my hand. I would like to check in with Aldo, our other interpreter, to see if anyone's on the phone line.
We still have no questions in queue.
We don't have any questions on the phone line.
Thank you for confirming. And once again, I'll allow a little bit more space and time, seeing that it's only 6:23 and we will conclude at 6:30. I do want to allow folks the opportunity when they feel comfortable to share their thoughts, comments, and or questions. So I'll pause for a moment to see if any hands are raised. Okay, if there are no other additional comments or questions for this evening, I will go ahead and conclude us a little early. Next slide, please. On behalf of the California Department of Conservation and California Air Resources Board, along with the agencies listed here on this slide, thank you again so much for joining us this evening. We truly value your time, as well as appreciate your questions and comments. Again, I encourage you to access the links provided in the chat, as you may find them to be helpful in regard to your questions and comments. We will update the FAQ and continue to provide relevant information as all things progress. And once again, thank you, and we are wishing you a wonderful evening.